warning signs on pursuing aggressive government spending in the short term, unquote. Madam Speaker, legislation like Bill C-8 does nothing to keep the country's books in order, instead leaving them overflowing in red ink. The bill for this kind of reckless spending will eventually come due for governments, but unfortunately, they will come due for struggling families first. Here's another email I received last week from a constituent in Kelowna Lake Country. Quote, "We are taxed to poverty, with EI and CPP premiums all increasing, carbon tax increases, along with inflation running rampant. Our paychecks keep getting smaller. Canadians are going to be in the poorhouse," unquote. The Association of Interior Realtors recently reported the benchmark selling price of a single-family home has now risen to $1 million. Housing prices in Lake Country rose similarly, with new figures from BC Assessment showing a one-year increase of 32%. The escalation in home values jeopardize the ability of seniors on fixed incomes to maintain their homes, prevents first-time homebuyers from ever being able to buy a home, forces families to live in homes that no longer suit their family size, and forces people to spend far more than 30% of their pre-tax income on rent. During the last quarter, I surveyed my riding of Kelowna Lake Country with a mail-out that went to every household to get feedback on tackling inflation and also what other issues they thought were a priority. And I had a huge response. And more than 80% of Kelowna Lake Country constituents who responded said tackling rising inflation should be a priority for me and my fellow MPs. And that's not just Conservatives in my riding who want Parliament to tackle this, it's across all party lines. This legislation does nothing to address the top issue my constituents are raising and adds $70 billion more in deficits with no plan on getting our fiscal house in order. It's really difficult to vote for this legislation based on all of the comments that I've made here today. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I'm somewhat disappointed. I'm hearing from Conservative members that they seem to not want to support C-8. And my question to the member is that there are many benefits within the legislation. And one that I would like to highlight is something that's in high demand today. The federal government has been there in a very real way for rapid testing. We have been able to meet the demands all the way up to the end of December, where most of the rapid tests weren't even being utilized, and then when they became in high demand, we were able to acquire another 140 million rapid tests. Legislation like this is supporting giving the financial means to get those rapid tests. Does the member not at least support that initiative?
Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I'm really glad that the member opposite brought up that question because, in fact, the Liberal government has completely failed in rapid testing. We have been calling for rapid testing since back in 2020. There are other countries across the world that had rapid testing widely available to families for almost a year now. We have completely failed in rapid testing, and it's one of the major reasons why we have had to have these perpetual lockdowns. It is one of the biggest failures of this government over the last 2 years. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech. I have trouble following my Conservative friends. They seem to be obsessed with the deficit, and yes, the deficit is going up. But this crisis is real, so how do we solve this? The Parliamentary Budget Officer says that the number of Canadian households who need affordable housing is going to reach $1.8 million in 5 years, and that's really unacceptable. And so the Liberal government is creating programs, but housing remains unaffordable. So clearly, the government is going to have to get involved in this major housing crisis. So what is the Conservative solution to solve this housing crisis?
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. This was definitely a big topic of conversation during the past election, and we have given many recommendations over the last year to the government, many of which haven't taken place. And you know, we have to remember that this is a government now that's been in power for more than 6 years. And all of their policies have failed because we have, in the last year alone, we've had a 30% increase in housing. So their policies are failing. They double down on a lot of their existing policies, and they're absolutely not working.
The honourable member for Skeena-Buckley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for Kelowna Lake Country for her speech. I didn't hear very much from the member on the specific contents of the bill, and while I share her concern about this government's overall response to the pandemic, I wanted to ask a question about specific parts of this legislation before us. There's a tax credit in here for small businesses to improve indoor air quality and ventilation in response to the pandemic, and $100 million to improve ventilation in schools. Now, this is a big issue. Ventilation in buildings is one of the most important ways that we can prevent the spread of COVID-19. So if not this approach that the government has presented, what is the member's idea for improving ventilation in buildings across our country?
Honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank the member for his question. In this piece of legislation, that is one of my favorite parts of this legislation, actually, is that piece right there. But once you add up all of the parts together, you get to this incredible amount of spending. So even though there might be parts of there that sound good and that make sense, once you add it all up, you get to this point where, you know, you're over $70 billion. So, you know, there are parts that I can definitely support that are good, but once you add it all up, it just gets to a point that when you look at the whole package, it makes it really hard to move forward with this legislation.
Resuming debate, apologies, the honourable